right, so good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. And if you're joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And this has been a particularly exciting month for us. Many of our long-standing classes will know that every February since we were founded, we kick out all the men and spend the entire month celebrating and showcasing incredible women in science and exploration from around the world. And never has that been more true than this year. In addition to the 35 plus broadcasts we're doing just across and throughout the month, we also did our Women Blaze Trails Festival, 50 programs in 3 days from the 12th through the 14th of February. You can check out all those links on our YouTube channel, a really incredible assortment of truly amazing people from around the planet. So with that, we are diving in today, continuing our long time series with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada. We're joined live by Kari Underhill, who's going to talk to us today about fishy adventures in the field. She gets to work in beautiful New Brunswick on the east coast of Canada and does a whole bunch of cutting edge science to track some really, really cool fish. So we're going to hear about her story today, some of the amazing animals she works with, and to dive right in. So Kari, thank you so much for joining us, and take us away.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the awesome introduction, Jesse. So I guess I'm going to dive right into my presentation. Like Jesse said, my name is Kari Underhill. I am a biologist, and I work with Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, Fisheries Oceans Canada in New Brunswick, in the city, very small city of Miramichi. Now, Miramichi is renowned for being one of the best Atlantic salmon rivers in the world. It's very famous. And so not a coincidence, that's what a lot of my talk is going to be about today. So I just wanted to start off, I know Jesse said that it's women in science, and I just wanted to start off with a really inspiring quote from Albert Einstein, not a woman, but it's really aimed at women or anybody who's thinking about just pursuing their ideas and their careers. And it is, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking we use to create them. So I think that's just a really important reminder to change your mindset. If you have a problem, well, something got you there, but switch your brain on in a different way and try and think about how you can solve it. And I think that is what is really going to encourage you and give you some success in your career in science. So as for myself, I am a biologist, and I work in the salmon and diadromous section. So you might be wondering, what is that word diadromous? It's a really big word, and it really means quite a complex thing. Not really, but what it explains is fish that use different habitats. So fish that need also to be in fresh water, like a river or a lake system, but fish that also, as part of their life cycle, spend time at sea, so in the salt water. And Atlantic salmon are a prime example of this because they're constantly changing every year from marine, from sea and the ocean to the river environment, and that's how they have to live. So they move around quite a bit. But there are other diadromous species as well, which I'll touch on a little bit briefly. As for me, I've been involved with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for quite a long time. The top picture is probably just a couple years ago. And the bottom picture, that is me 20 years ago when I was a university student doing my research in the same area, newer boats, but same area. Also, funny story, that is the same life jacket, which I have since replaced. But as I was mentioning, diadromous fish, there's a lot of different species. Atlantic salmon is our main one, but we look at other species like eels, gasperos, striped bass, which I'll talk about, and a few other species as well. And apologies in advance because I'm always so excited. I tend to talk really quickly, so I hope I'm not talking too fast. So in terms of salmon, Atlantic salmon, some really, really super cool facts for you guys. The scientific name of salmon, Atlantic salmon, are Salmon, salar. Now, salar, the second part of that word, actually means their ability to jump. So it means leapers. And salmon got their name because they are amazing jumpers. And the reason for that is that sometimes when they're crossing through river systems, they have to get over a waterfall or some really big rocks or just different obstructions that get in their way when they're trying to go up the river to spawn. And in salmon, what they found is that they can actually jump about 4.5 meters high. That's huge. That's 15 feet for you guys in the States. The Olympic record for all Olympians ever is 2.45 meters. So that's almost double of that a salmon can jump as compared to us humans, who are obviously a lot bigger. So that's a really cool fact. Also, they are amazing travelers. Myself, I like to travel. Can't really travel that much right now, but guess what? Salmon still can. So the little map on the side is amazing because it shows you the pink dots, which are the east coast of Canada. That's Miramichi, the very first pink dot in New Brunswick. And it shows you tracks all the way from a salmon, Atlantic salmon, that was tagged and went all the way up to Greenland, you guys, up by the turquoise dots at the top. So that is a distance of about 2,000 kilometers. And the even more impressive thing is that they go that far and then they swim all the way back. So in the same year, sometimes every other year. And so that's 4,000 kilometers that a salmon can travel. And it's not like us traveling by planes and trains, which we used to do. It's all by swimming. So that's pretty amazing. So as I mentioned, the life cycle includes the sea and the rivers. And so this is the actual life cycle of the salmon. So everything starts as their eggs when they are being deposited in the river, in the little rocky beds on the riverbeds. So the females lay their eggs in the fall, and they dig out the rocks and they lay their eggs and they get fertilized. Then in the spring, those eggs hatch and they get to be called alevin. Now, the picture up on the top right, I love this picture because alevin are so cute, the little tiny, freshly hatched salmon that have just come out of their eggs. And you'll see the little red pouch underneath them. And that is called their yolk sac. So what that is it's like a little lunch bag that the mom has prepared for them. So when they hatch out of their egg, they have this little ready-made nutritional pouch attached to them, so they get lots of like their big first meal after hatching, and then they're fend for themselves. They have to find food in the river. So what salmon do is they spend 2 or 3 years in the river, sometimes 4 years. It depends where you are, and they go through different phases, like a fry, a par. They'll get to be bigger, and they'll get to be what we call a smolt. And the smolt is kind of like a teenager or like almost an adult, but they're heading out, so they're going on their own. The parents are, well, they kicked them out at the beginning, but they're ready to venture out on a big adventure by themselves. And so smolt, what they do is they take off and they make a lot of changes to their body, and they migrate out to sea. So they go out to the ocean. Then Atlantic salmon stay 1 or 2 years generally out at the ocean, feeding, getting huge, getting big, getting strong, and getting all those resources that they need so that they can come back. So they come back into the river system again when they're big and strong. And that's when in the fall that they lay their eggs and spawn to create young for the next year. So it's a pretty impressive life cycle. One also really cool thing about Atlantic salmon, which you might not think about fish having great sense of smell, but when the salmon return back to the river, they a lot of times will return back to the exact same river that they were born in, so that when they were an egg and they hatched, they a lot of times will return to that same area to lay their own eggs again. And scientists think that it's because one of the main reasons is because of they recognize the smell of the river. So that's pretty awesome. So how do we catch these fish? I'm not out there with a fishing rod every day because that would take me a million years. And so what we do is we actually build every year these trap structures in the river. And I fish 2 of them. And from May to October, these traps get fished every single day. So if you look at the shape of the outer part, it's a rectangle, and that's all with netting around it. And that's what's going to hold the fish once they get into the net. The long straight line from the shore to the rectangle is what we call the leader. So if fish is coming in, you follow the bottom green arrow. It's swimming upriver. It comes into that leader section of the trap, and it can't go through the mesh, so it just follows it along. And then that effectively leads it into our trap net. And you can see they're basically like funnels them in. So they have little triangles of mesh, and it leads them through a small opening, and then they get into the trap. Now, you might worry about them, but don't worry, because we fish these traps every day. So whatever fish are caught in those every day, we go out, we sample them, and we re-release them. So they're not in the trap very long. And this is a picture of us, I'm going to say a typical day, but the weather's not usually this beautiful, or it can be, but not always, us fishing our trap. So we pull alongside the trap, we lift the nets, we scoop out fish, we identify any of the diadromous species that we might be capturing that day, and then we sample them. So depending on what species we get, we have different sampling protocols. I love this picture because, as Jesse mentioned at the beginning of his talk, it's the month of women here at Explore by the Seat of Your Pants. And this picture is really encouraging for, I think, all the young female scientists out there, because if you look, there are 3 females in this boat and 1 male. So not to minimize the male's responsibility or job in the science field, but just to encourage that there are lots of great ladies in science doing amazing things. So this is us when we're a much cloudier and colder day, as you can tell by my toque, as we call them in Canada, sampling out on the boat next to the trap. And this is what we do when we catch salmon in the trap. So our first thing that we need to do is identify if it's a male or a female. And that's usually done later in the year, or with the bigger fish, you can tell by the shape of their face. And then what we do is, obviously, you guys, I'm sure you know, because you guys are all very intelligent kids, that fish breathe in water. So they need to be in water to breathe, unlike us. And so what we do is we sample them in little boxes that we fill with water. So even though we have them out of the trap and in the boat, they can still breathe in the water while we're collecting all of our data. So in that box, we have a measuring stick, and we actually measure them against the measuring board. We will, for salmon, we tag pretty much all of the salmon that we capture. And you can see that little blue tag by the top dorsal fin in the second picture. And that tag has a number on it. And that's going to give, if anybody ever catches this fish again, takes a picture of that tag number, sends it to us, we can get information from them, but we can also give them the information of where this fish was last tagged, when we saw it, how big it was, all the very cool stuff. And then, of course, when we catch them, we tag them, and then we re-release them back into the river. So this is a picture, an underwater picture of what it looks like if you're a salmon in one of our traps sometimes. So just a little picture of what they can look like when they're in the net, just hanging out, waiting for those lovely scientists to come and sample them. And this is a really quick video, so I might even play it twice for you guys. This is when we release one of our salmon after it's been tagged. So obviously salmon aren't used to humans, touching them and measuring them and things like that. So it's really important when we are releasing salmon back into the wild. We've put a tag on them, but we like for them to go at their own health and their own speed. So we don't rush the process. So you'll see in this quick video that one of our scientists is holding the fish, and then when the fish is ready, it just gives a nice little kick and it's gone. And it's quick process. Tagging usually takes less than a minute, and then they're back right into the river with a fancy new earring, we always like to joke and say. So as I mentioned, that's of course not just salmon that we catch in the trap. So I'm going to focus on striped bass as well. And as you can see from the amazing pictures of this fish, it's pretty straightforward and pretty easy to see how they got their name. Big black distinctive stripes down their sides, striped bass have, and very fitting for them. Very similar, we take the fish out of the trap, we measure them. We have a measuring board for these guys because they're so spiny. If we put them in the box, it's really not good for them. So we handle them really quickly. They're really hardy fish. And we also put tags on them, but you can see in the bottom picture that the tags are different. They're like a yellow tag. It's called a spaghetti tag, but same principle as the salmon tags. They have a number on them, and that's how we can identify. So if a fisherman catches this fish and takes a picture of the tag, sends it to us, we can get information from the fisherman as where they caught it, and that tells us where that fish went after we tagged it. So just before, I've got another couple quick videos to show you. And so like I said, striped bass and Atlantic salmon are both diadromous fish, but their life cycles although they both go in between the sea and the river, they have a little bit of differences in that striped bass come into the spring to spawn instead of the fall like the salmon do. And we're really lucky. It's a very cool phenomenon here in Miramichi, New Brunswick, is that all of the striped bass that are in the Gulf region population from the east coast of Canada, although they can disperse at different times of the year, in the springtime, the Northwest Miramichi River is, as far as we know, the one of the only documented rivers where they come and spawn. So they come to lay their eggs. So it's basically like a huge party. They all come back in the spring, and our river becomes alive with all of the fish. So I'm going to play you a little video. And if you have your sound up, you can actually hear, it sounds like I'm standing next to like a waterfall because there's so many fish splashing at the surface. So all of those splashes are groups of striped bass spawning. So the females are laying their eggs and the males are hanging right there by trying to get ready to fertilize those eggs. And remember I mentioned before that Atlantic salmon, when they spawn, they dig their eggs into the rocks. Well, striped bass are different. They spawn in the water column. So they're either just below the surface or at the surface of the water, which is what you're seeing in this video. So here's a closer video of one of those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups that we see when it's active spawning time. And if you look, you can even see the stripes on the bass as they're swimming along. And again, I just love that sound because it just gives you an idea of how much activity is going on underneath the surface. So that's probably, could be only maybe even one female in that group of 10, 15 fish. And then the males are trying to spawn or trying to fertilize her eggs that she's laying right there in the middle of the water column. So how do we know how old fish are? I know all of you guys know your birthdays off by heart because that's like a very cool day for you guys and me too. But how do we know how old the fish are? They're not going to be able to tell us. So what we do as scientists is long time ago, they learned that the actual scales on a fish can tell us the age and some of the life history of that fish. So this is a salmon scale, a picture of a salmon scale. Now scales, as you know, fish, their bodies, a lot of fish, not all fish, but salmon, their body is covered in scales, which is used as like a protection layer against like scratches and predators and disease. And so, but when we take these little scales, when we're fishing them out of the trap, we'll take tweezers and pluck a few of these scales off of the fish, and then we put them under a microscope. And if you've ever heard of how people sometimes can know how old a tree is by counting the rings, that's a very similar theory. As the fish grows, it gets more rings, and that's how we can tell how old they are. It's not one ring per year like with trees, but more if the fish is growing fast, then the rings will be farther apart. If the fish is growing really slow, then the rings are really close together. And from those groupings, we can actually tell how old the fish is. And we can even tell how many times they've spawned, which is really cool. So just as simple as a little tiny scale, that they can give us a lot of information. And this is a cool fact that I love about salmon, not all species, but salmon for sure. When they're born and when they're tiny little fish, so the picture on the measuring board is a par, it's a baby salmon, and it's about 15 to 16 centimeters long. The picture on the right is one of the pictures of me holding a huge adult salmon. I don't remember specifically how long this one was, but it was at least 90 centimeters, close to a meter long. So that's a 6 times difference in the size from that little tiny juvenile salmon to that big salmon. But guess what, you guys? They have the same number of scales from when they're tiny to when they're big. They don't get any extra scales throughout their life. Instead, the scales that they're born with just keep getting bigger and bigger with those rings as they're growing. So a scale from a tiny fish to a big fish, same number, just much bigger in size. So I love that fact. I think that's super cool. And they can lose scales throughout their life as well, but then they'll regenerate them and grow them back. So here's a quick comparison to show how cool it is that different species have different looking scales. So the one on the left is an Atlantic salmon scale, and the one on the right is a striped bass scale. Very different types of scales, but we can look at both of these and still be able to tell how old these fish are. So I love that. So, and if we're in the boat and there's a scale on the bottom of the boat, or if there are a million scales on the bottom of the boat, which a lot of times there are, you can actually pick up an individual scale and you might actually be able to know what type of fish that scale came from. I do so much work and it's hard to compress it into one talk, but a lot of times, like scientists, our busy season is the spring, summer, and the fall. But We also do work in the winter. And I'll tell you about some of our more scientific work or our more computer work. But sometimes you'll even find me out in the river or on the river in the middle of winter, you guys. So bundled up to the nines up here in Canada. We take snowmobiles out, we shovel holes, we drill holes into the ice, and then we actually collect water samples. This is a different technique that we use for monitoring striped bass, especially because in that water sample, very much like if you take a shower and you kind of some of your hair falls out or on your pillow after you sleep, that hair contains genetic material. So it can contain your DNA. I don't know if you guys have heard of that or if you've learned that yet, but it can be helped used to identify you. And when we just take that jar of water and dip it into the ice hole and collect water under the ice, if there are striped bass in the area, they may have shed some of their scales or some of their DNA. And that in that little tiny jar, sometimes we can actually tell if there are striped bass in the area. So it pays to put on lots of extra layers for that work. And of course, you'll hear all scientists say it's all fun and games until wintertime, a lot of us, because winter's usually our less busy season. And that's when you usually find us doing the not so exciting part of standing or sitting at a desk and staring at a computer screen or 2 computer screens or 3 computer screens. And a lot of times you'll find us in the winter months analyzing all of those numbers, all of that data that we have collected over all of those field months out in the field, in the boat. And so there's a lot of data and things to numbers to crunch and maps to look at. And so that's the less pretty side of a presentation about the life of a biologist. And of course, I couldn't resist adding, because of COVID, a lot of us are working from home right now. And so here's a fun picture of me aging scales, looking under the microscope at some fish scales. And I have a little partner in crime sometimes, my little supervisor, my cat Minky, who likes to help me out sometimes. So last slide is, why do I love my job? Well, I think if you can look at all the pictures and you hear my voice, I think you can tell I'm pretty enthusiastic. And I think one of the main reasons is that I'm always learning and I'm always doing different things. Every day is different. Even if I'm going to fish the same trap every day the weather's different, the catch is different, I see different fish. So I'm always learning new things. Also, I love to be challenged. So because every day is different, you have to respond differently to different situations. You might have plans to go do field work and then a huge storm blows in. You have to make quick decisions and quick changes. So there are a lot of challenges that come with the job. And I think it brings, sometimes they're messy challenges, as you can see in some of my pictures, but it gives you that challenge, and it challenges you to find different ways of coming to a better solution. Also, I have to give super props and big credit to the people that I work with. Throughout my whole career with Fisheries and Oceans and with other scientists in other departments and other industries and organizations, the people are amazing. Everybody who does this job, I find they're just so passionate and enthusiastic, and I just can't give enough credit to my teamwork or the teamwork that my team does. And we're all working towards the same goal. And I think that really helps get you success where you need to be and get your research done. And I hope to be making a difference. Because of all the different things I participate in, we get a lot of numbers, a lot of population information about different species. And yeah, it's awesome. And that's it for my talk. I don't know how long that took, but
that was perfect.
That's it for me.
A perfect length, Kari. That was great. Your enthusiasm certainly shines through. And if you're worried about talking fast, don't worry, because I've got the all-time record. No worries. We've got a bunch of classes joining us, both live in Ontario and Wisconsin, on YouTube across the province and beyond. So welcome into the over 150 kids that are in with us today. It's really exciting to have you guys here. And I'm so excited to dive in with questions. So I'm going to come to our live classes in just a minute. But Miss Plant's class is joining us on YouTube. They couldn't quite get in today into the live broadcast. So they want to know, how many fish specimens have you tagged? How many approximately have you tagged in your life?
Oof, that's a hard question. I've probably worked in this job doing about 7 or 8 different field seasons, and numbers change. One thing I didn't mention, especially for Atlantic salmon populations, is that even in that short time period that I've worked in this field, I've seen huge changes in the numbers of fish that we catch. So the population numbers are a lot decreased. They have decreased a lot in the past 20 years. And so that's concerning for us, and that's why I think it makes our job even more important. When I was a summer student, there were days when we would capture maybe 100 or more salmon in a trap per day. And then some days you go out and there might be 3, and then you might get 50. So probably thousands of fish over 20 years off and on of tagging. I'm pretty quick at it, I have to say that. So I think that comes from years of experience.
Let's count back through the years. 1, 2, 3. A lot. And we get this sort of question when people are involved in this sort of work a lot, and it's like functionally uncountable. So great question to kick us off, Ms. Plant.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Let's head to Pulaski, Wisconsin for the middle school there. Miss Linsmeyer's class, you guys had a bunch of kids come out near the camera, so I'll come to you guys first. All our groups, you guys can demute your mics. It's a lot easier when we go to Q&A if you're demuted to begin with. So let's head to our first class. Hi, guys. I know there's a bunch of you near the camera. And Miss Linsmeyer, if you want to unmute the mic, you'll be all set.
You can ask. Taylor, you can ask them right here. How long can they be out of water without like getting hurt or dying?
For the salmon? Well, as I said before, I'm sure everybody knows, fish need to be in water to breathe. So we really, as scientists, I mean, we're going into their habitat and we're taking them out of theirs. So we try to be really considerate of how long that we're taking them out of the water. And that's why, especially with the salmon, they're quite sensitive species. So we're really protective, and we use those sampling boxes that keep them in water. So I wouldn't even try and guess a time, because every individual is different, and if it's stressed, then it needs more oxygen, and the longer it's out, the worse it is for that fish. So we just try to do our work as quickly and as least invasively as possible, and considerately by trying to keep them in the water. So even with anglers, you see like the process of, if you catch a fish is to release it as quick as possible and get it back into the water, and always keep it close to the water, and get it back in as soon as possible. So I wouldn't dare say a time, because like I said, and it depends on the water temperature. Warm water, the fish get more stressed, they need more oxygen, so they will be able to last even less time out of the water.
Cool question, guys. All right, we're going to take a break from Wisconsin for just a minute to go to Goderich, Ontario, and one of my favorite shorelines in the entire planet. So Miss Hayden's class, if you want to unmute your mic and come on in, go for it.
Hello, thank you very much. Thanks so much, Kari, for sharing. You guys could wave.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, so we have a couple of questions. We have one from Marina. She's just wondering if there's one specific species that is, most difficult to catch and tag. That's the first question. The other question, can you talk a little bit about invasive species? Is there one in particular that most threatens the Atlantic salmon, for example?
Sure. Those are great questions. So probably we don't tag all of the fish that we capture, but definitely, without question, the hardest fish to handle is the American eel. So they're kind of like a snake covered in slime. So we do catch them in our traps sometimes. And actually, as a university student, they were my favorite to measure, because they were the hardest, and they're really slimy and icky, and not everybody liked them. So I grabbed that opportunity to be the kind of specialist in measuring them. But we don't tag them, thankfully. But trying to get gloves and handle them to get a measurement on an eel, it's a very tricky job. So take that into consideration. And for your second question, that's a great question. Invasive species. So obviously, as I mentioned, Atlantic salmon are a species of concern. There's different, depending on the population, they have different classifications as to like special concern, endangered, depending on the region. So they're very important. And there are sometimes other species that can come in and cramp the territory or the habitat of the population, or affect the populations in a certain area. So in terms of an invasive species technically is a species that is not meant to be there. And here in the Miramichi, we have another species of bass that is invasive. It's not native to our river system, which means it was never there, but it got put into the river system by someone or somehow, and that's called a smallmouth bass. And so that's a population that we're really monitoring. Different sections have been monitoring their presence and their effect on the Atlantic salmon population. One of the main reasons being that they have similar habitat. as the Atlantic salmon. And so if the smallmouth bass start cramping in and taking over the habitat, it could negatively affect the Atlantic salmon.
Very cool question, guys. I really don't know what I found funnier in that. The idea that an American eel is a snake covered in slime, or how absolutely mortified that one student behind Miss Hayden was, because that was amazing. It's okay. You can wait on camera. It's going to be all right, I promise. Let's go to Mr. Lander's class in Pulaski. Come on in, demute your mic, guys, and take us away with a question.
Aubrey, you want to ask? So the student's coming up, but we just got done reading Paddle to the Sea, which the St. Lawrence River, empties right near where you are.
Into the Gulf, yeah.
And then we'll also be studying invasive species. Aubrey. So the student's just coming up here. Sorry, the camera angle. This is the only place I can have the camera on in my room.
Oh, camera angles are half our fun. Don't worry. There's nothing wrong. Perfect.
All right, go ahead. Ask your question.
Have you ever have any injuries during your job?
I have had some injuries during my job. Probably the most common one is me just being clumsy and getting bruised up from beating my knees against the side of the boat. A little bit more serious injuries, or not so serious, but oftentimes when I'm tagging the Atlantic salmon, we use a needle to tag them, to put the tag we put a needle into their back, and then it's a hollow needle, and we feed the tag through that. And I've had many times where I've stabbed my finger, because as you're stabbing a fish, and sometimes they feel it a little bit, and so they flinch, as we might when we get needles. And then, of course, the person tagging gets stabbed as well. So I've had that happen many times. Also, another part of my job that I didn't get to mention is, as I mentioned, I do lots of different things sometimes. So I get to help out in other sections and other work taking place. And a couple of years ago, I actually had probably my worst injury from work. I was attending the necropsy, which is a fancy word for the autopsy of a dead whale that had washed up, or dead right whale on the East Coast. And so this whale had washed up, and a bunch of scientists, we were having to do a very large dissection on a massive whale. And unfortunately, my clumsiness took over again, and one of the knives slipped and I caught one of my fingers. But thankfully, it wasn't very bad. But I was disappointed more because I had to leave the dissection and go to the hospital while everyone else was still doing the fun dissection. But other than that, I'm cured, and I still have all of my fingers and toes.
I'm not sure what I like more about that. First, that you're the only person in the history of 2000 Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants to say that in the course of your work you've been stabbed multiple times, or the fact that the worst part of it is not that I'm serrated edge and I'm going to the hospital bleeding profusely, but man, I'm missing out on the whale.
Yeah, try explaining how bad you smell when you go to a hospital. That was also embarrassing.
So for our classes, I know we've got a lot of classes that aren't anywhere near Toronto. I think some of our groups on YouTube are. The Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto had a watch that one of the scientists who dissected a whale, they had it in their gallery, and you could go up and smell it. It is to this day, the worst thing I've ever smelled in my entire life ever. Yeah. So it's quite horrible. So I think you dodged a bullet. I mean, I'm sorry for you, but
that's all right. I still have my finger. It's okay.
That's good. That's what matters. Let's head to Ms. Madel's class, also in Wisconsin. Come on up, demute that mic, and then we'll do a second round of questions in just a minute. So go for it, guys. Hi, sixth graders.
Awesome. Our question asker's coming up. Come on up, crew. You guys can wave. You can say hi. Show some enthusiasm.
Hey, enthusiasm. Love it.
This is crew.
What was the last fish you caught and when?
Ooh, the last fish I caught. Well, last year, as everybody knows, 2020 was quite a different year for us. Normally, we'd be putting our traps in May and fishing all the way till the last week of October. But because of COVID and all the restrictions, we weren't even allowed to start fishing until about August. So instead of getting about 6 months of fishing in, I think we got two and a half. And actually it was quite a memorable day because I had a new staff member start that exact day that was our last day of fishing. And she was taking lots of pictures. I said, oh, it's fine. You'll see lots of fish while you're here. And it ended up being the last time of the year that we went out. So I'm thinking it was probably a striped bass because we had quite a few that day. So I think that was probably the last one. And we didn't tag it, but we definitely measured it. And I probably got stabbed by that too. So
probably every time you go out. Speaking of people on your expedition with you, Miss Plant's class had a question about that, which is how many people would be on a typical tagging expedition with you?
So that's a great question. And usually we try to have about 3 or 4 people on our crew at one time. So we have 2 different boats that fish the trap. We have to kind of go on one side, lift nets. So normally there's 3 or 4 of us out at once to sample, collect the fish. If there are times of the year when we expect more bass or more salmon, and so it's a bit more hands-on. And so on those days, we might bring out an extra person or 2. And sometimes we also have visiting scientists or researchers who are coming to collect other data different than the data we collect. And so they come out with us on the boat. But generally on most days, it can be anywhere from about 3 to 4 people on a team.
Yeah, I love the collaborative nature of science, and we hear this
Yeah.
a lot in our fisheries and oceans and Canadian government science work in general, is how many collaborations across the country, around the world there are, in just the widest array of research, which I think is one of my favorite things about science, is the fact that you get to do so many things with so many cool people around the
Absolutely.
planet. Yeah, a real perk of the job. Elizabeth, in Ms. Hayden's class, we will come to that question in just a minute, but it's a great one. I'm going to go back to Ms. Linsmeyer for just a second. We'll do one more round with all our classes. So Ms. Linsmeyer, come on back in. Unmute that mic and you're all set. I think you guys have some more for us. Here we go.
You want to ask him your question? Sure. There's the camera over there. No, you're good. Yeah, you can ask him. Yeah. You're unmuted.
How fast can a salmon swim?
Oh, that's a great question, and I don't think I know the answer to that one. I know they can swim pretty fast, but I don't have a number to it. And sometimes, and maybe it's because we've just stabbed them with a tag, they can fly out when we release them. They just jet. But they are capable of very high speeds. And just a side note from that, to show how capable they are, when I mentioned earlier that they can jump, it's because they have such strength in their tail. So when they kick their tail, they get a ton of momentum. And that kick, the strength of that kick, is what shoots them when they're going really fast swimming, but also shoots them up vertically when they want to make those big jumps. But that's going to have to be a question that I look up afterwards. You guys, sorry, I can't answer that one.
I've been doing it while you've been chatting about
Okay.
it. A whole bunch of jargon in like centimeters per second, which is very odd. But the closest thing that the internet says is 25 miles per hour over short distances, which is about 40 kilometers per hour. So it's considerably faster than people can go. And if you've ever seen footage of salmon leaping a waterfall or something, you'll see how fast they can go. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, they can do it for burst speeds, like you say, but then they need to slow down. They can do sprints.
Yeah.
Not marathons. Well, they do a marathon just at a slower speed.
Usain Bolt of the fish world. Let's head to Goddard. Miss Hayden's class. You guys had a great question in the chat, but come on in and ask it in person. More fun that way.
Hi again. First question from Elizabeth. Do you ever experience fish mortality while tagging, number 1? And number 2, what kind of partnerships, if any, do you have with commercial fishers and fisheries in your region?
Oh my goodness, you guys are amazing question askers. Those are great questions. In terms of mortality, obviously when you're doing science and you're working with animals, different individuals, different fish or different conditions can lead to more difficult just conditions, tagging conditions or survivability. Obviously, we try and avoid that at all costs. And with fish, they're very sensitive to different things like temperature. Water temperature is a big one for Atlantic salmon. So we have very, very, very minimally have had the occasional mortality because of our tagging or if something went wrong. But consider it something like if you have a doctor. They do the best they can. They try and avoid all circumstances that might lead to a negative outcome. Sorry, and they take all those steps to avoid that. But sometimes, unfortunately, if it's a weaker animal or if something just doesn't respond correctly, then you do get the very, very occasional mortality, which we try not to focus on and we try to obviously avoid at all costs. And we actually take measures to avoid those circumstances. In the summer months when it gets really hot, we take the temperature every day at the trap. For the water temperature. And as soon as we get to kind of classic temperatures like 22, 23 degrees, the really not ideal water temperatures for salmon. And so as soon as we hit those water temperatures, or even as we're nearing those water temperatures, we even more closely monitor their fish response to us sampling. And we'll oftentimes completely cut out handling the fish if it's too warm. And we have had a couple times in the past couple of years when it's been extremely hot conditions. There will be days when we actually take our trap net out of the water just to completely, the animals, for them to be able to completely avoid any additional stress in their day-to-day life, and they're trying to kind of fulfill their life cycle.
Very cool questions today, guys.
There was a second question and I forgot it.
The commercial fisheries. Have you?
Oh yes, perfect. Thank you. Sorry. And that's, yes, we often do. As Jesse said, there's a lot of collaborations that go on with fisheries and other organizations, non-governmental. With our striped bass, that's a prime example of a working relationship with the commercial fishery. So here in the Miramichi area, there's a commercial fishery for Gaspereau, and we take that opportunity when they have similar trap nets, similar structures, but there are many more of them. And we actually have some of our scientists that go out and sample while they're collecting the Gaspereau from their nets. We have people going out measuring and counting number of striped bass in their captures. And that helps us formulate all of our numbers together to get population estimates for the striped bass population.
Fantastic.
And there are many others. We work with First Nations groups as well. Sorry, I didn't think. But.
No, that's totally fine. We've done a bunch of programs with Andrea Jane Reed. She's now an assistant professor at UBC, and they're going to be talking about fisheries and Indigenous collaborations across the country. So she's amazing. Andrea Reed is a great follow-up to today's talk with Kari. Let's take 3 more questions, guys. We're whipping through these. These are great. Really quickly, off YouTube, what's the oldest fish you've ever brought on board? I mean, you showed this huge one. How old would that be, and how old do they get?
Salmon in the wild, they can get over 10 years. I think there's even, I think I read one account of about 12 to 15 years is like their really upper limit range. Of course, most of the eggs that are laid, they never even get to fruition. They don't even hatch successfully. So it's a lot to get from being an egg to getting to be one of those huge fish that I handled. I'm not sure about age because we look at those after. Probably the oldest fish I've aged a scale of, whether I sampled it or somebody else sampled it, was probably about 9 years old. It had come back to spawn, I think, 3 times. So that was quite an old fish. And the biggest fish, the biggest Atlantic salmon that I've ever measured was when I was a university student, and I've had a couple close to that since then, but it was over a meter. It was 100, and I think it was right around 110 centimeters in length. And I couldn't even get my hand around its tail. It was huge.
Very cool, guys. I always love the superlative questions. We've got time for 2 more. I'm going to go to Ms. Mallow's class first, just because there's a student up and waiting, and then we'll finish off with Mr. Landers in just a second. So let's head to our grade 6s. Hi, guys.
Okay, so how many fish do you normally catch a day?
What was that? How many fish do I normally catch in a day? Yeah. So some days we catch none. The typical fishing solution. Not every day do you catch something. You're not always successful. So it can literally range from 0 fish at all to days when we have striped bass, when they all come in for spawning. And in the fall, we get big runs of striped bass as well. And I think the biggest day that I've been fishing, we estimated, because you cannot count them all when there are that many, we had over 5,000 striped bass in the net. And striped bass are very spiny. So it's quite a mission to get those out of the net and try and get an accurate estimate. And the biggest day I think my coworkers had, they estimated there were about 7,000 striped bass one day.
Yeah, very cool. I totally unexpected. That's fantastic.
Those are the days I don't need to go to the gym.
The unexpected workout. All right, Mr. Landers, if you have one more question to wrap us up, this has been great, guys. Come on up and finish us off.
Mine was, do you use any bait to get them in the nets or traps?
Oh, that's an awesome question. And no, we don't actually. So like I mentioned in my slide, it's basically just a trap net that blocks off not the whole river, but it kind of captures them as they're swimming up the river. So they hit that leader, that netting, and then they just follow it in and go into the trap. So we don't actually use any sort of bait or lure or anything to get them there. It's basically us kind of coming in with a little traffic diversion and to catch them, and then we release them to keep going on their way up the river to spawn.
Yeah. Great questions today, guys. This has been so much fun. Again, we mentioned at the beginning, Kari's part of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. She can check out more about their amazing work when I can find it. There we go. They are on the website below in French and English, wherever you're tuning in from across Canada or the US. Do check that out. We'll be doing more programs with them later this week, in fact, so stay tuned. Check out our newsletter for some more great stuff. And Kari, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, thank you guys so much. There were so many great questions. And yeah, now I got to try to find out more about speeds of salmon.
We're going to do a whole talk on that next. In the future, we'll bring you back. We'll have some fun. It'll just be like racing animals of all time.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Well, actually, before you say goodbye, I'm bringing all our classes to say goodbye to you. So Ms. Lindsmeyer, Ms. Hayden, Mr. Landers, Ms. Matthews, thank you.